After 11 volumes, Maomao finally accepted her feelings for Jinshi. And not only that, she even kisses his cheek and lips as he sleeps soundly. A lot happened during their time in the Western capital. After arriving in Volume 10, the story finally begins to wrap up by the end of Volume 12. However, before they could leave, they needed to stabilize the region and find a suitable leader, especially since the previous ruler Gyoku-ou had died. During this process, Maomao is kidnapped once again. It all started with Maomao's inability to leave things as they were. Her curiosity led her to follow a little girl to check on her uncle, who had been struck by a poisoned dart. The man turned out to be Shikyu, one of Gyoku-ou's sons and a potential candidate for leadership. And since the assassination attempt was carried out by someone within the main household, Chue took Maomao and Shikyu away, knowing that he would soon be framed by his other brother. So the three of them, along with two children, leave the main house traveling to a safer location. During this time, Jinshi suffered through the separation once again. But this time, he knew that Chue was with her and was certain she would not let Maomao get hurt. It's not very important, but we also get to see a different side of Chue, though I am not going to spoil this twist. You have to read the novel to get the first-hand experience. All we need to know is that the political crisis was partially solved and they were finally returning home. That's when Maomao gets cornered by a huge one-eyed man who was pretty mad at her because she had tricked him a few scenes earlier. Even though both of his hands were broken, he still managed to hit her, but thankfully she was wrapped in a blanket, so the blow wasn't that bad. He lunged at her again, but this time Chue stepped in to protect her. Using her skills and with a little help from others, she successfully killed him, but it costed her a broken arm and a deep wound to her abdomen. Despite the agony, she was smiling as always, apologizing and saying she had just made a little slip. Her eyes began to lose focus and blood was seeping from her stomach. Maomao immediately picked her up and carried her to the wagon. Even in this state, Chue insisted that she tend to her arm first, believing that without it she would be useless. That's not true, Maomao said. Then she added, "My life would be much harder without you, Miss Chue, so this cannot be the end. Whatever happens, you have to live." To which she teased her by laughing and saying, "Miss Maomao, I might start to think you love me." Yes, I love you, so please stop talking," Maomao replied desperately. "That's terrific. A confession of love from Miss Maomao. I'll have to brag about it to the Moon Prince." To be loved, even just for a little while, is a wonderful thing. You almost start to think it means there is a place you belong. Maomao didn't say anything. She was too busy sliding her fingers along Chue's abdomen, searching for internal bleeding. Then came the words that would stay with Maomao, the words that would eventually allow her to accept her own feelings. She said, "I know you have your circumstances, Miss Maomao. It is important not to get carried away by your emotions, but..." She brushed Maomao's cheek with her blood-stained hand. "You cannot let that be an excuse either." She laughed one last time and closed her eyes. Maomao didn't know what she meant by that, but she was not going to let her go without a fight. Clenching her fist with resolve, she began the surgery. In the end, they made it home safely, and while she was trying to work her way back from Chue's bedroom to the medical office, she swayed on her feet, thinking about how utterly exhausted she was. The surgery was a nightmare. There was no anesthesia. Chue's arm was shattered and badly torn. She had done her absolute best to set the bones back in place and stitch the skin. She could only hope that Chue might eventually regain some sensation. As for herself, she hadn't had a wink of sleep since the attack. Still, when she thought about how many others were suffering far worse at that moment, she felt she had no right to rest. She intended to go to the medical office, or at least that was what she thought. But instead, her feet were taking her in the opposite direction. She thought to herself, "This is Miss Chue's fault." Her and her mumbling, speaking as if she were leaving Maomao with her final words. Driven by those thoughts, she headed for Jinshi's office instead. She did not normally come to this room without summons from Chue or someone else, and she found that it required more courage than she had expected to knock on the door. She took a deep breath, let it out, and then knocked. She waited, but there was no answer. She gave the door a curious look, thinking that perhaps no one was home. It felt as though the wind had been taken out of her sails, so she turned to head back to the medical office, and at that exact moment, the door burst open. She turned back in surprise and found Jinshi standing there. He looked haggard. It seemed he had pulled yet another all-nighter, once again overestimating how much his body could endure. She wondered how many days it had been since he had last slept. His eyes were puffy, his skin dry, his hair lacked luster, and his lips were chapped. She asked how many all-nighters he had pulled, and in response, he asked her the exact same question. Then there seemed to be something he wanted to say, so he reached out, grabbed her hand, and pulled her into the office. He tugged so hard that she thought she might tumble straight onto the floor. But before that could happen, he caught her, and so they ended up on the floor, Maomao on top and Jinshi underneath. There was a nice thick carpet to land on, but even so, she wondered if the fall had hurt him. After a moment, Jinshi said, "Don't go running off like that again." In response, she simply apologized. Then he added, "Try to think before you act." She said she did, and that was exactly why all of this had happened. She felt a warm breath against her head and knew he was sighing. She couldn't move. She tried to look up at him, but his chin was in the way. He said, "I brought you here because I thought it would be safe." How could everything have gone so wrong? She told him that things do not always go according to plan, and that even if she had stayed in the capital, the same sort of thing might have happened. True enough, he said. There was silence again. She wonders, why were they lying there on the floor, trading what amounted to banter? What if somebody saw them? We should at least close the door. I've got to get up, she thought. How long did he plan to lie there holding her? To be perfectly blunt, she hadn't bathed in days and had hardly even changed her clothes. It must have smelled gross, lying there with a woman covered in sweat and dust. Those were her thoughts, while he actually took a whiff. She called his name, and when he responded, she asked, "Maybe you could let me go one of these days?" Trying to get away as always. He said that she could always push him away herself, but she was just so sleepy. She took his hand. It felt very heavy, but he wasn't specifically pushing her down. It was just there. She could hardly think straight. Perhaps it was the release of all that tension, but she felt oddly safe. Was it the thick carpet that felt so nice? Or was it the warmth of another body right next to her? She tried to brush his hand away but couldn't. Instead, her breathing gradually evened out, and slowly, so did his. What do I do here? She wondered. Her eyelids were trying to close, but she felt like there was something she had to tell him. Chue's voice echoed in her mind. "I know you have your circumstances, Miss Maomao. It's important not to get carried away by your emotions." "I'm not getting carried away by my emotions," she thought, and looked at the face of the beautiful man before her. She studied it for the 100th time, and I guess it's safe to say she was mesmerized even now. She couldn't comprehend it. To get what he wanted, he had tried to remove himself from a position at the very top of power. If his goal was indeed Maomao herself, then she could only think there was something wrong with him. It was a heat like molten metal. She wasn't sure what to do with it. All for the temperature she could return was no more than that of lukewarm water. Slowly, she reached up toward his cheek and pressed her tepid warmth against it. It felt a little cooler than her hand. His eyes were completely closed, and he nuzzled against her hand like a kitten being petted. He was asleep. Perhaps he had finally relaxed. There is nothing I can give him in return, she thought, and brought her face closer to his. Their breaths mingled, and she noticed that his lips were even colder than his cheek. Then a short while later, her breathing also settled into the steady rhythm of sleep. She slept soundly for the first time in more days than she could remember. This scene, along with several others, proves that she actually does love him, and in fact, she may have loved him for a long time. At first, she didn't fully understand her own emotions. Later, she became worried about the difference in their social status, choosing to remain rational and realistic while trying not to get carried away. Now, she worries that she can't return his feelings with the same level of passion. But I feel like in the scenes that followed later, her one simple gesture showed that she was finally letting go of that worry too. Moving on to Jinshi, his first proper sleep in days went a long way toward restoring his energy. When he woke up, he looked at the bed where Maomao was curled up, still caked with dust and blood. She had been so exhausted that she didn't woke up, even when he picked her up and laid her on the bed. It killed him to realize that he had fallen asleep before her. He knew she must have endured things far worse than he had, wishing he could have tucked her in sooner with a nice, soft blanket round her. On her cheek, he noticed a spot where it looked like she had been struck. The rest of her body was covered in scratches, and there was even a blade mark on her neck. He gathered that her blood-soaked clothes were from treating the badly injured Chue. "You look awful," he murmured. He suspected that if he asked her what had happened since the last time he had seen her, she would give him only the most business-like report. She would make no attempt to make him worry or seek his sympathy. She didn't have the fake sweetness that the other women in the rear palace used when they tried to get his attention. Did she act this way so she wouldn't be a burden, or simply because she saw no point in getting emotional? If it's the former, then Jinshi wouldn't be content until he had done something about this infuriating cat-like creature. Plus, since he had stopped taking the medicine that allowed him to pass as a eunuch, he had fully regained all his functions. He wondered whether she realized that he would be nothing but a beast if the cold chains of rationality hadn't bound him. Seeing things from his point of view shows just how much he has grown emotionally. It's a beautiful change. If he were to meet the Jinshi from the early volumes now, he would likely feel disappointed or even angry at his former self. Anyways, before leaving to attend to his duties, he went over to bed once more, leaning in close, careful not to disturb her deep sleep. "Perhaps I might charge myself up just as much," he said, almost to himself. Then he gently brushed his lips against her cheek. But sadly, the meeting he attended afterward was so exhausting that it drained all of his energy, leaving him wishing he had charged himself just a little more. Fortunately, that meeting concluded who would become the leader of the province. With that settled, they were finally able to board the ship and head for home. But unfortunately for Maomao, the freak strategist joined them on the ship as well. And to make matters worse, he suffered from seasickness just like Lahan and spent most of his time leaning over the side, emptying the contents of his stomach. There was also another person on board whom she disliked, the man responsible for her kidnapping and basically this whole arc. Before long, she grew sick of looking at either of them and began to wonder where else she could go. That was when she spotted the lookout's platform high up on one of the masts. "Excuse me, could I go up there?" she asked a nearby sailor. "What would you do up there? It would be dangerous for you, miss," he replied. She simply told him she was curious. Nevertheless, he brought her a rope. She tied it around her waist and began working her way upward. Just as she was about to climb onto the platform, she realized someone had beaten her to it. It was Jinshi. He was already sitting there. He explained that he was trying to get away from someone rather troublesome, the same person she wanted to avoid, though she was also trying to find a spot where the freak strategist was not vomiting. In other words, they were both there for roughly the same reason. "Anyway, have a seat," he said. "It's a bit cramped," she complained, but he simply told her to live with it. She sat down, effectively shoulder to shoulder with him. What else could she do? It really was cramped. Perhaps they had only allowed her up here because someone else had already done it. "We're finally going home," Jinshi mused, looking up at the sky. It was perfect blue, with puffy white clouds, a picture of peace, as if nothing bad could possibly happen. She casually brought up work, maybe because she didn't know what else to talk about. But then she immediately regretted it, knowing very well how deeply he felt the weight of his responsibilities. He didn't need her to remind him that a mountain of work would be waiting back at the capital. So instead, she asked, "What do you most want to do when we get back to the capital, Master Jinshi?" "What do I want to do?" He pondered. He thought so hard that he began to frown and tilt his head. She didn't think he needed to think about it that hard, as she hadn't meant it as a difficult question. "Do you really need to think about it that hard, sir?" she asked. She could think of all kinds of things she wanted to do when they got back. Pick medicinal herbs, compound some medicines, experiment with the effects of some new drugs. All kinds of things. Jinshi, on the other hand, was sure there's a panoply of things he didn't want to do was waiting for him, and all he could seem to think about was how he was going to deal with them. To continue the conversation, she brought up the possibility of a new consort for the emperor, and they talked about it for a while. He told her that both the young prince and the princess were doing very well. She then wondered whether she could visit Empress Gyoku-ou again. At first, he agreed, but when she reminded him that the empress had already tried to scout her several times, he quickly changed his mind. Then he said, "What do I want to do? You know, there's one thing." She asked what it was. In response, his hand brushed against hers and settled there, emphasizing how much larger his hand was compared to her own. "Is this what you wanted to do?" she asked. "There are other things too," too, he replied. Is that so? She starts teasing. But I can't. His eyes drifted down toward the spewing figure on the deck. I'm restraining myself as hard as I can. It's not easy. By now, she was well aware of how he felt, and she knew that he no longer had to pretend to be a eunuch. Even though sitting so close to him, high up there, felt a bit awkward. At the same time, to her, it wasn't that unpleasant at all. Chue's words echoed in her mind again. She seemed to think of those words whenever she was with Jinshi. What she felt for him was not, she suspected, a burning passion. She could not respond to him with the same feelings he brought to her, but at the same time, there weren't that many people in the world with whom she could feel this safe. She was starting to figure out what her own feelings were, and had begun to believe that she ought to accept them. It might have been nicer if a clownish lady-in-waiting hadn't been the one to give her that final push, but she knew she had to face it eventually. Her hand still sat against his. Nothing more had happened, which was fine by her, but now she wasn't sure when to pull her hand away. He called her name quietly. Yes, sir, she replied. As she turned to look up at him, she found his face coming down toward hers. The touch of his lips was so light, so casual, that for a second she didn't even realize what had happened. At first, he said nothing, so she asked, What, are you embarrassed? Realizing he had flushed red even after such a simple kiss, he denied it, claiming that he was simply restraining himself and that he planned to continue doing so in the future. Before she could stop herself, she exclaimed, Restrained? You didn't restrain yourself so much before. He agreed, his expression turning grim as he remembered the time he had forced a kiss on her, and how she had turned the tables to give him a taste of his own medicine. To reassure him, she said, Don't worry, sir, I won't get you back for it this time. That's not what he began, but she cut him off. You'd rather I did? He pursed his lips and looked at her. I rather thought you despised it. This time, she said nothing. Instead, she glanced away from him, thinking to herself, I think I don't despise it, do I? If she didn't, then of course she wouldn't try to get him back. Even so, she couldn't accept Chue's words so wholeheartedly as to actually say it at this moment. That's why she stayed silent and somehow managed to change the subject. Since neither of them wanted the freak strategist to notice or approach them, Jinshi also fell silent. As she looked down at the deck, she still didn't take her hand away. For those who might have missed it, this small gesture adds so much to her character development. It's subtle and heartwarming to see her this way, to see her walk one step closer to Jinshi. In the end, Maomao's love will always be my favorite. Not just because I think it is deeper, but because it feels more comforting and stable. If you want, feel free to tell me your thoughts or your favorite type of love. Till then, that's it for this video. Thank you for listening to me. Take care of yourself and goodbye.
I don't really want to hurt you, but I can't control the pain. If you're sticking by my side, maybe we could be okay. Okay, maybe you could be the change.